Well, again, welcome everyone. We've got a phenomenal session for you tonight. Just to remind you, we are recording this session as well. So just wanted you to be aware of that. But Abby, if I could ask you to share the screen again, so I can review a little bit about what we're going to do tonight for our team here. Tonight is pretty simple. What we're going to do is explore some ideas about what are effective teams and how do they work, how do we build them, how do we lead them. We talked a little bit last time about ineffective teams, so today we're going to focus on what really works. And then we're going to invite, about halfway through the session, 4 panelists who happen to be Gettysburg alumni from all different fields, and you're going to have the opportunity to engage in a conversation with them. And then also we're going to make sure you feel comfortable and ready to go before the simulation, which we will begin next Tuesday. So those are our goals. But I want to start with one question first. And Abby, if you could change the slide, please. My question to you, and feel free to unmute yourself, or if you need some time to think about this, what would the world be like without teams? Think for yourself, what would this world look like without teams and teamwork? And if there's something that comes to mind that you'd like to share with the group, please just unmute yourself and let us hear your response.
Well,
Sorry, Jack, was that you? You wanted to say
Yeah,
something?
uncoordinated.
Uncoordinated.
I was going to say language and tools are the main to differentiate humans from animals much, and language what enables us to create teams. So I mean, it would be like without language. I mean, I don't think we'd get very far. Certainly wouldn't be where we are today.
Great, thank you, Nick. Any other responses? What would the world be like without teams?
I imagine it would be more a situation where every person is out for themselves, and it would probably result in a more competitive atmosphere, and people would have to specialize in a lot more things because they wouldn't be working with other specialists. And therefore people probably wouldn't know as much in each field.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, it's something perhaps we may take for granted, that teamwork is such a valuable part of human life. It's something that is intact in almost all organizations. It's a skill that potential employers look for, one of the top 10 that has been rated by potential What comes to mind, and how does that differentiate between organizations and perhaps other groups?
You froze out for a while for me. If you could repeat that, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, how would you define a team? What is it that makes a team different from a group or an organization?
In my example, I just said that they're looking to go towards a common goal.
Yeah, I'd say it would be a group that works together to meet a common goal using skills brought by each of the members and using all of their different experiences and their different traits to better work towards this for specialization, with each person able to do their own part better than another person, all working towards a singular goal.
Very good, Alex. Thank you
I
so
hear
much.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, whenever I hear group or organization, I just think they're working towards for a profit. I don't know why. That's just kind of what I associate with. And then I think teams are just kind of like a group of people that like generally tend to like each other more and aren't worried about just making money, but just accomplishing their goal or whatever that may be.
Yeah. Thanks so much there, Gabe. Well, this question is something that is very important for organizations to consider. What is a team, and how do you go about affecting it? And I wanted to share just a little bit of research from a project that asked that particular question of what makes an effective team. So Abby, if you could change the slide here. I want to talk about a project called Project Aristotle, which you may have heard about from a couple of years ago. Google, as the organization, was really interested in what makes effective teamwork. And they studied over a 2-year period, 180 different teams in a double-blind research study. And what they wanted to understand was, what is it that makes teams more effective and perform to a higher degree? And they defined teams in terms of interdependence. So the work that the team was given required the collaboration and connection amongst the members. So they did this study, and what they found was 5 particular characteristics that make up effective teams. So Abby, if you could share the next slide here. And these characteristics here are listed on the screen, so I'll give you a few moments just to take a look at them. But as they went through their research, they thought about team size, the individual skills of members. They thought about, how many members were on the team, and none of those things really had an influence or a factor in making those teams effective. But these 5 things did. So psychological safety, which is this idea of people in your team feeling like they can be themselves, they can share openly and honestly and demonstrate vulnerability. The second characteristic was dependability, this idea that you can be reliable, that you are going to do what you say you're going to do. And that was a condition that existed within the team. The third was each team has a structure and clarity where people have a good sense of. And then the fourth is meaning. So people feeling like they have a purpose in their work. And then impact, which is that their work matters beyond just that team. So those were the 5 particular characteristics that came out here. Another component that Google found was the role of leadership. And so Abby, if you could take us to the next slide here. And they found that as opposed to top-down or vertical-based leadership, shared leadership is really what enabled these teams to thrive. And this definition here is shared leadership is a group process in which it is distributed among and stems from team members. So although there may be clear leadership roles, the actual demonstration of leadership behaviors is shared and enabled and empowered amongst all members. So that's just a few ideas to get us started thinking a little bit about what does it mean to be effective in teams. And what we're going to do now is actually give you a chance to discuss this in your groups. And so Abby, if you could go to the next slide, please. So what we're going to do in just a minute or two is break you out into your teams. And I want you to go back to your written responses that you wrote down at the beginning of the session. And as a team, I want you to discuss these 3 things. So based on the 5 characteristics, what are the things that you agree with that showed up in your written responses? What are the things that you disagree with that perhaps were in your team experience, but not necessarily in Google's research? And then is there anything else that you would like to add to those 5 characteristics? And so in this discussion, you're going to talk through this, and then I'm going to ask you to actually share your particular responses on a Google Jamboard. And so if we could actually show the Jamboard here so folks can have a sense of what that looks like. Abby or Paul, would you mind sharing the Jamboard? And actually, Paul, just put that in the chat, sorry, so you can go ahead and access the Jamboard. What we're going to ask you to do is for each team to actually put 1 or 2 responses on a Post-it note on the Jamboard. Okay, so have your conversation first as a group, and then create 1 or 2 Post-it notes and add that onto this board so we can all see a little bit about what you're thinking. I put 2 examples on there. If you can see the blue Post-it note to the right of psychological safety, that's an example of something you might want to add in terms of what you agree. And then in green, there's another example of what you might disagree with. On the lower right-hand side there on the Jamboard too is things that you might want to add. Okay. So are there any questions about what you're supposed to do as a team before we break out? Okay, well, thanks. Well, Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you to put us into the breakouts.
All right, you should be in the same breakout rooms that you were last time. Your breakout room is named with your team name. So if for some reason you find yourself in the wrong group, I apologize. Just come on back to the main session and we'll sort it out with you. We'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Also, you could look at it this way if you like, or if you just want to stay in the Jamboard in a different screen, feel free to do that. Whatever's the best way for you to see it, because what I want to do is really digest what you actually put on the Jamboard tonight. So take a few moments, take a look at what you see. Feel free to zoom in on particular Post-it notes and get a sense for what each team is saying. And after you've taken a few moments to take a look at it, I just want you to unmute yourself and share a little bit about what is it that you see? What do you notice when you look at these particular responses?
I'm seeing there's not too many Post-it notes next to meaning, so I think that that shows that that one is pretty well-rounded. Pretty hard to argue against.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Good point. So there seems to be a gap there, yeah.
I also noticed that under point 3, structure and clarity, there's a note about how it shouldn't be rigid, but people should know their responsibilities. And I think that it's important to be flexible and sort of adapt to the team's needs as different situations can change.
Yeah, great point, Brent. Thank you. What else do you notice?
A lot of the adding things essentially boil down to the team being able to work together, either through communication, chemistry, or just, I think it says, being comfortable but not too personal. So essentially, people in general seem to think that the team has to get along and be able to let the others know what they need or where they are in the project.
I agree with what he said, because team chemistry is important. It doesn't matter if you have the most talented people on your team, it's not going to work. Just look at Houston, the Houston Rockets and James Harden. You had John Wall there, but there was no team chemistry. It didn't work. You had too many people trying to be the number one guy. That is not good for getting team bonding.
You know, I really do love the sports analogy, because in many ways, a sports team goes through all 5 of the Google examples of what makes a team. But I just find it funny how it doesn't work as well as others, because in sports, well, the goal is for the team to win, especially in basketball. There's an emphasis on you got to be the guy, so to speak.
Thank you, Brendan. Something that surprises you when you see this Jamboard? Is there something that you see on there that makes you think twice?
I think the meaning section is a little bit surprising. Just in that when it says it's personally important to team members, I feel like in a way it can be personally important to everyone, but in a different way. Like everyone could be going for not a different goal, but have different like personal aspects to it. So it might be personally important to them, but it's not always the same level of importance or same meaning.
Yeah, I agree with and also for number 5, like impact, the like giving your like team like the job that they're doing a purpose. They're going to be more willing to work together to reach that common goal and like achieve that commonality of it than if it doesn't have a purpose. And it's kind of like meaningless and mundane and not really, the team's not going to want to do anything about it.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Good point. When you think about the journey that your team is about to embark upon next week, what would it look like for your team to put some of these characteristics into action?
Well, based on what we know of how this is going to work, every single person on the team has their own specific role, whether that's medic or whatever the other groups were. So there is a certain team structure. They have clear roles and have to work together to plan it. And each one has to be depended upon to get to do their job correctly. If it works out well, then the people care about what they're doing. It's not just a job that they have to do, but one that they want to get done for the sake of the team succeeding altogether. So the team has to believe that their work matters and it has to be important to them. And the team has to be willing to take risks with the rest of them and I guess be open about what it is. And so including the communication, people have to tell the others where they are in their work, what that means to the work, at least in a way that the other people can understand, and how this might affect what the other people are doing and the group effort.
That's great, Alex. A lot of good insights in those points there. Thank you all for sharing. What we're going to do now is actually transition again to a breakout group. And I want to give you some time as a team to think about specific questions that might come to you around how are you going to work together as a team effectively. We have our panelists joining us very shortly, and they are here to engage in a conversation. So we want you to take some time, think about, okay, based on some of these ideas and this research, what questions do I still have that would be helpful for our team going into this simulation and thinking about how we can be most effective in the teamwork. And don't worry so much simulation related questions. Focus on what is it going to take for you to be an effective team and practice some of these principles. Okay, so we're going to give you about 10 minutes in your team to think through these questions. And actually in the next page of the Jamboard, there's another place for you to go ahead and add questions. And in that section, we want at least one question from each team. Okay, because we're going to use that in our conversation. So Paul, are we good to do another breakout here?
We are. Please accept once it pops up. See you in a bit.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks again for generating some questions. We took a look at the Jamboard there. It's looking good. I am so ecstatic to introduce you to 4 fantastic people who are part of the Gettysburg community and who have joined here as volunteers tonight to engage in a conversation and share some wisdom that they have about building effective teams. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves and share a little bit about who they are and how they spend their time. And then I'm going to ask a few questions to get us started. And then we'll go to the Jamboard just to integrate some of the questions that you came up with. And that's really what we're going to do for most of the remainder of the session. Towards the end, we'll do some final reminders about next week. But this will be the rest of the session. So I'm going to ask Carol to kick us off and share a little bit about who you are and how you spend your time.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. And one, I want to commend all of you guys for taking part in the J-term, the first in a long while. I will start by saying the J-term, I actually am a graduate of Gettysburg. And when I was a student here, we had a January term and it was part of our curriculum. So when I saw that it was back in action, I was so pumped because it's really at a time where you can concentrate on one area. So ours was not voluntary, however. So I want to say kudos for you for actually taking a leadership act in leading yourself and taking part of this excellent program. I'm no stranger to the GLC. I've been have had the privilege of working with Andy and have had several of my players serve on the GLC board and in the committee and participate in the activities. When I mention my players, I am the head women's lacrosse coach here at Gettysburg College. Like I said, I'm a graduate and I left for 10 years and got my coaching legs under me and then returned to replace my mentor, Lois Bowers, where I coached field hockey and lacrosse for 10 years. And now I am an assistant athletic director and the head women's lacrosse coach. So it is a joy to see all of you guys. I want to commend all of you on how you have been extremely resilient through everything that we've gone through and continue to go through. And I'm just super excited to be with all of you this evening. Thanks, Andy, for inviting me.
All right, I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Gilmore, class of 2014. Apologize, my cat likes to make cameos on Zoom calls, so apologize for that. And I was a leadership mentor at the GLC for 3 years, and I actually had the privilege of coming back to Gettysburg after I graduated to serve as the interim program coordinator for a semester, and I got to spend more time with Andy and Meg and Samir and all the LMs. And I currently live in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I work as a physician assistant in inpatient psychiatry with St. Luke's University Health Network. And I will say this about psychiatry: you are never bored in this field. So I love what I do. And when I'm not working, I have a lot of free time these days because I'm a Patriots fan, and they didn't make the playoffs this year without Tom Brady. So it's going to be a dark winter here as a Pats fan. But I do like to use my smoker on the weekends. I'm a smoking guy now, so I like to smoke brisket and pork shoulder and ribs. That's my new old guy hobby now. So I will pass the torch off to Meg Royer.
Hey everyone, my name's Meg. I am a Gettysburg grad, class of 2015. And I was also a leadership mentor for 3 years with the GLC, so pretty familiar with the programming. But I now work in DC. I work for Deloitte in our federal practice, so working with different government clients, primarily within our Department of Defense. And my primary focus is helping them integrate user feedback into whatever service or product they're providing. So a lot of like buzzwords there, but essentially talking to the customers of these offices and trying to help them update what they're producing based on that feedback. So my day-to-day looks different every single day, but a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of PowerPoints. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. So handing it off to Samir.
Thanks, Megan. My name is Samir. I'm one of the founding LMs when GLC was founded in 2010, and I served for 3 years. I'm a Gettysburg class of 2013 graduate, and I live about 25 minutes away from Megan in Vienna, Virginia, so just Northern Virginia area. I work at Salesforce as a product security engineer, and I work between, like, my job duties rely in 3 specific spheres. So in security, we work with architects to make sure whenever they design new features, it's secure for our customers. Once those features get developed by development teams, we again need to test them and make sure that nothing was missed out in terms of security. And finally, once we ship it to customers, if customers have any feedback regarding security or find some issues, we are the ones to triage and resolve them. In my free time, I was in consulting for a long time, so I didn't have free time, I would say. But right now, since I do with Salesforce, I've gotten back to reading and like exercising a lot more. And it's fun to actually read for pleasure versus a lot of articles that you have to read. So handing it off to Andy.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you to all our panelists. Well, let's dive right into the conversation. I think what is clear and present in front of all of our minds is that remains really since March is the global pandemic. And obviously it's challenged our society in lots of different ways. And I'm curious to know how it has affected you and your work with your teams. And so what I wanted to start with in terms of the question, and this relates to one of the questions from Swarming to the Top team, who asked about what are the challenges that you've faced with teams. So I'd love to start off with a question. If you think back to back in March when we really started to see the impact of the implications of COVID-19, how did that impact the teams that you're a part of, and how did you navigate that challenge within your teams? So that is a question for anyone on the panel. Would someone like to go first?
Well, I'm happy to tackle that because some of you all experienced it. Maybe some of you were away on your spring break. Believe it or not, it was 10 months ago yesterday that we were sent home. And we were actually, our team was on spring break and we were playing competitions down in Maryland. We came back to campus knowing that something was going on, right? And we were then sent home on Friday, March 13th. Now, imagine not being able to play games or practice. I mean, it was very hard to, as they like to use in COVID world, pivot and into how do you make this work? I mean, we can't play our game virtually. So, for a while, we kind of said, let's take a break and process this. So I think sometimes you're quick to react and especially as a leader say, well, we got to do something. And our something was, let's breathe, let's process, and let's reshift our thinking and find another way to stay connected. Because ultimately, as a coach of a team, the games are the byproduct of the growth that a team goes through and the learning and all those really important tangibles about conflict resolution, connectivity with people, stretching your limits. That's really what we're teaching when we're playing sport. And so we just had to really rethink. And so after a pause, and when we learned we were not going to be coming back to campus, we decided to run our remainder of our season like the season. So we had game day. So we play 2 games a week usually. And so we got together on game day. We even had post-game family gatherings because on game day, moms and dads travel to the games. We have fun meals together and tailgates after the games. So we did that on occasion. And then we really just continued to work on personal development, which happens through sport for us. But now we really shifted it and talked about all the things we always do. Okay, maybe you're not setting goals to win a conference championship right now, but you're setting goals to try to win the day. And what does that look like for you? So we practiced, and we were ready and prepared because our team always practices on the mental aspects of sport and of our inner confidence and self-accusation. So we pivoted, as they say, and we just tried to stay connected. And that was really the essence of it all. It just looked a lot different. Thanks for asking that question, Andy.
Carol. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Carol. So, I mean, you used the word pivot there, but what I also heard is that you try to institute a lot of the same practices or the same initiatives that you would normally do to sort of create a sense of connection and a sense of normalcy, which is really great.
Great. Yeah.
I want to ask the same question to Dave. Recognizing being in the healthcare field, sort of, what was the experience like in your teams?
Yeah, I think working in healthcare during this pandemic has been quite a challenge. It's really kind of put a lot of stress on the hospital leadership to kind of communicate what everyone's role is going to be and to make sure that staff and the patients are safe. We're in an environment where we're exposed, pretty much on a daily basis. And I think when the pandemic first started, obviously everyone was very, very scared, very afraid. And rightfully so. There was a lot that we didn't know. There's a lot that we still don't know. But when it comes down to it, the hospital is a large building that has a lot of different teams. And so for my team, I'm not necessarily worried about what's going on with the ortho floor or with the cardiac service. I'm just worried about my day-to-day with my psych patients and with my nursing staff and with my physicians and with the support staff. So I think one of the things that is really applicable, especially from the Project Aristotle, is that our team is pretty small. So everyone knows their role. We're less than 10. And Project Aristotle was talking about how groups of 10 or less tend to be more effective than larger groups. When you're faced with the pandemic, you need to have effective communication among staff members. Everyone knows what the policy is for masking. Everyone knows what the policy is for testing. Everyone knows what the policy is for remaining socially distant. So as long as the staff members know their role and do their jobs, everyone ends up being safe. And, I've been fortunate. I haven't been sick. I got my vaccine. My fiance, she's a PA as well, and she works on the COVID floor regularly. She's actually there today. And she tells me the same thing. They have their own team. They have their morning report where they go over the patients, what their needs are, who's positive, who's a close contact, who's in quarantine. And because of that constant stream of communication and because of that constant delineation of what everyone's role is, there's never a question. And if there is a question ever, people are not shy to bring it up because unfortunately we're faced with life and death decisions here. So, now is not the time to hide something if you have to say something or if you're scared about something, if you're hesitant. Everyone communicates, everyone does a really nice job with that.
Thanks, Dave. One thing that you noted there that I'd like to follow up with and ask Meg this question. And this comes from one of the questions from Halal Gang, who asked about how do you know which person is suited to what particular role? Dave talked about the importance of roles, and that was apparent in Project Aristotle's work. And Meg, you spend a lot of time building teams and assigning different roles based on projects. So do you have any thoughts on that particular question? Like, how do you identify roles for folks and meet the skills and experiences that might be helpful in their roles?
Yeah, for sure. So for some context, as a consultant, my engagements can last anywhere from, my shortest has been 6 weeks to as long as a year. And generally my teams are about 4 to 6 people, so pretty small, and you're working with one client in that time. So while I've been at Deloitte, I think I've been on 10 different client teams specifically, and have seen ones that worked and ones that didn't around this role assignment. And the ones that have worked really well are ones where roles are assigned based on our own development goals. So the team I'm on right now, we went through on our first day, like, what's everyone's goal out of this project? And one of the analyst roles, like, he really wanted to engage with our client more. So we have him putting together the weekly update to the client and then presenting that, because that's an area he wanted to improve upon. And that might have been a role that typically would have gone to a manager or someone higher up in the hierarchy, but because we recognize that's what he wanted to get out of the project, that's his role. So I think aligning project roles to everyone's goals is a good way to get buy-in. In a not so great situation, I was on a team that had very strict work streams and everyone owned one product, and you were responsible for bringing it to completion, whether it was something that brought you energy or not, or whether it was something you were good at or not. And the difference there is it was a lot more siloed. You weren't working with people. You weren't getting different thoughts on the same product, as well as people just didn't bring the same energy. It was like you logged into your computer at 8:30 and you logged out at 5:30 and didn't look forward to the next day, because maybe you were at a point in the project that you're not that excited about and you weren't really able to flex your skills. So we talk about that a lot on our team, and every single day we pull up on our to-do lists and talk about, like, what are people excited about. And I know now that I'm on a little bit more of the leadership side of the projects, I've spent a lot of time talking with the other people about how to use our analyst and consultant, and how, like, asking them what they're excited about every day and saying, like, does this task excite you? Are you learning something new here? Because if it's just administrative, we can figure out another way to get this done. So I think just aligning it to personal goals and then having those open conversations has been really successful from the teams I've been on.
Thanks, Meg. It makes a lot of sense based on what we've been talking about in this program. And to continue on the theme of roles, Samir, I'd like to ask you a question that came from the Power Rangers about the specific role of leader in teams. And they asked, what qualities do you look for in a person when appointing them a leader or identifying a leader in some of these teams? So I'd love to hear, based on some of your experiences, how you might answer that question.
Absolutely, Andy. I think at the end of the day, I think the principles that I've learned in GLC, if I transpose them to work, I think the better question to ask sometimes would be, like, what makes an effective leader sometimes? Because in our titles, we have managers, we have architects, and there's a hierarchy of titles. But I've noticed that some of the best leaders, or, when I see who's the most effective leader, some of the biggest quality is they know when to step in. A leader listens a lot more than speaks. They listen, understand, and they know when to step in. And sometimes it's not necessarily positional. So for example, recently, we had a situation where a new member was presenting an idea, like a research idea. And people were bringing, throwing a lot of questions at her, which were pretty complex. Someone stepped in and said, okay, let's hold on for a bit. Let's finish the presentation first. We can ask all the questions later. And anyone in the group can actually feel free to answer. So this is something that I thought was one of the leaders I followed. This is something that they tend to do, where they know when to intervene, and they know that it's not necessarily the person who's hosting that has all the answers. None of us have all the answers, but someone who could actually figure out how to get the team together, get all the ideas on the table, and then eventually filter the discussions into noticing which is the best idea and which is not the best idea. And I think that's one of the key lessons I've learned so far.
Thanks, Samir. That reinforces one of the concepts we were talking about earlier tonight, was this idea of shared leadership, and then how it goes beyond just the position of leader, and that leadership can be shared in effective teams based on who might have a suggestion or an idea in that particular moment. So thanks for sharing that. I'm looking at the Jamboard here, and it seems like one of the most common questions really gets at the heart of some of what makes working in teams challenging, and that is conflict. And so this is a question to any of the panelists tonight who would like to respond. But how do you navigate conflict in team settings? You know, it's something that for many of us may feel uncomfortable. How do you think about conflict, and what experiences or suggestions might you have for our students tonight on that particular issue within teams?
Yeah, so I mean, I think conflict sometimes can have a negative connotation to it, but you know, there's a lot of positives that can be taken from conflict. And one of the examples that I was thinking about in preparation for this panel was something that actually happened fairly recently with one of my patients. And it was conflict between my unit staff and what the administration was suggesting. And so to kind of explain things, we have a patient, her name's Desiree, obviously changed for HIPAA, but Desiree is very sick, and she's a very big problem on our unit because she's very violent, and she has a problem with assaulting staff, and it's become such a problem that we've unfortunately had several staff quit because, you know, they don't like coming to work knowing that they're going to get beat up by a patient. I wouldn't want to do that either. So the administration was made aware of it, and they suggested that we try Desiree on a medication that would require very frequent blood work, EKGs, a lot of hands-on care for a medicine that may or may not work for her. Well, this is what the administration suggested to us, but in our morning report, which consists of myself, my attending physician, the charge nurse, and a social worker, we looked around and we were like, there's no way Desiree is going to do well in this medicine. It may not work. I mean, it may be the right decision from a textbook standpoint, but from a practical standpoint, we have some serious concerns. So we discussed it. I discussed with my charge nurse. I said, you're the one that has to work with, you know, these patients in the trenches. You're right there with them. You're the one that has to physically put the needle into her arm to draw the blood. You know, that I know that's a trigger for Desiree to become violent. What do you think? And she said no. And then I asked the mental health technicians that are in charge of monitoring Desiree in a one-to-one observation, what do you think? No, bad idea. Everyone across the board was saying this is not a good idea. So I wrote in my note that I didn't think it was medically a wise decision. I went to the administration, I explained it, and I talked about how all the support staff are in agreement and that I respect their advice, but we're going to have to look somewhere else. And they got back to us actually yesterday saying that they would respect that. And they're going to put Desiree on a referral list for a longer term placement. So that was something where we could have had conflict. I could have wrote the order to have her start this medicine and force my nurses to be in a position where they're uncomfortable or potentially at risk for violence. But what kind of team member would that make me, you know? So I think we could have had negative conflict, but we turned this into a positive. And now ultimately the patient is going to get the care that she really needs, and the staff is much more safe.
Dave, that hits on a point that I think of when I think of conflict. So this idea of like, at the point of conflict is not when it's going to go right or wrong. It's all of the time before. So creating an environment that you were comfortable listening to people across and you trusted each other's opinions to manage that, like that's all of that work ahead of time is what made that conflict go okay. So it's not like in the moment, there is definitely conflict resolution strategies and there's, you know, hearing the arguments and everything, but most of the work is creating the right environment before the conflict happens. So creating a culture of trust and of openness and feeling like everyone can be like, we always say at Deloitte, which is might sound corny, but like being your authentic self. So feeling like you can really bring your full self there will make managing conflict a lot easier because it won't feel so personal and it won't escalate beyond the specific issue.
Great. And if I could just add a little bit piece too. I think these points are absolutely fantastic. We know that conflict is likely inevitable. And sometimes when you are working, and I'm fortunate enough to work with some really competitive athletes that want to win. And sometimes in conflicts, people extend that into wanting to be right or saying my way is the right way because they're competitive. So it's kind of a nice trait that you're like, my point is the right point. And saying it with confidence, it's like, that's a great quality. However, it could be a curse as well. And one of the things I think that we have found that works well for us, especially with the competitiveness and their desire to want to win every battle they're in, we really focus on trying to put on the shoes of the other person or the other topic that we might be in conflict about. And to minimize conflict, we spend a great deal learning about our team's various styles. Some people like to be spoken to a certain way. Others like to want to have facts in front of them. Others want to be combative with one another. Others want time to reflect and then offer their opinion about things. So conflict can be minimized when you are willing to put yourself in the other person's shoes and when you have a greater understanding of your team members' behavioral styles to pressure, to stress, to conflict. And that way you talk to them more in a way that meets them in their behavioral and learning style and not your own. So conflict can be minimized by understanding who it is you're working and talking with.
And just to add to that, I think I'd like to extrapolate situations where conflicts may be between teams, not just individuals. And one of the things I've noticed is that as we get more experience or as we notice things, we learn to challenge our own thoughts. So for example, when I studied computer science at Gettysburg and like computer science, math, some of the hard sciences, there was always one right answer, and that was the way to do it. However, recently, for example, when we had quite a large issue, we came across a lot of possible solutions. And I'd like to remind everyone that at the end of the day, conflict is a part of the process. At the end of the day, you got to figure out what exactly is the end goal. So when we had such a challenge and while interfacing with different teams, the engineering team had a solution which was like very straightforward for them, whatever was the easiest for them. As a security team, there is an ideal solution, a perfect solution that we pushed back. But at the end of the day, the solution that we implemented was not ideal, not perfect, but it was what's best for the customers. Because at the end of the day, if we have so many customers and if 100,000 customers are impacted by a solution, even if I say, hey, I need it to be completely secure and it has to be this way, it won't achieve the goal in the trust that we create with the customers. So at the end of the day, conflict will be a part of the process, but highlighting what are your priorities in terms of what are your goals, and then working based on that can actually help understand. And at the same time, we'll also have to be flexible with our own notions of what's right and what's the best to do in a specific situation. And I think that's sometimes a better way of looking at conflict and resolving it.
That's a great point there, Samir. And it seemed like a common theme in a lot of your responses there about how to navigate conflict is that one, it's inevitable, but two, it's about creating the conditions within the team to be able to engage that conflict productively. And I'm looking at a question from the Baby Yoda's team about how to foster that sense of teamwork when you might be around people that perhaps you don't know each other yet. And that's the experience of our current teams, right? We've only met a couple times in this program, and starting Tuesday, our team is going to ascend to the peak of Mount Everest. So do you have any perspectives on or advice on, for those teams that you're a part of where perhaps you don't know each other that well, how do you create that productive and comfortable environment where we can practice psychological safety? And that's a question for anyone.
Yeah, I think psychological safety, when you think about it, it's, you're being comfortable taking a risk, saying something that may cause conflict. For me, I bounce between hospitals on different units. So I could be in 5 days of a week. I could be in 5 different teams. You know, I think the key piece for any team is that the members need to have some degree of humility. I think that goes a long way. In medicine in particular, because you could be the most brilliant psychiatrist in the world, but that doesn't mean that you're infallible. You know, people make mistakes. And I think being willing to set your ego aside, admit that you don't know everything. You know, for instance, if I'm coming to a new unit, I don't know the patients that well. Yes, I know the medicines well as the provider, but the nurses know that so-and-so is violent, or so-and-so doesn't like, you know, when her coffee comes with 2 sugar, whatever it, you know, like there's little things that each team member can do to show that they're vulnerable and willing to accept criticism, accept change, that would make a team of strangers become close very quickly. So that humility part's very important.
We spend a lot of time in virtual teams. So I'm now on my 3rd team where I haven't met anyone in person and everything's been through Zoom. So I think we spend a lot of time actually talking about what we did the night before and checking in on each other, especially being based in DC, checking in on each other's mental health around current events happening. And we actually had so I started this project that I'm on now about a month ago, and we had a Teams norms session of like talking about like core working hours, how we like to have conversations, and then like stupid stuff like beach or mountains and morning or night person, whatever. But then 2 weeks later, so today, we pulled up on that again and had the conversation again. And to Dave's point, people were willing to be a little bit more vulnerable. We're willing to share a little bit more about what they actually need. But also, a lot of us just said like, yeah, we want a happy hour, or we want to start every day with like a Sporkle quiz, or just some way that we are getting to know each other as people rather than just the work that we're putting out. So just even like in the morning, my manager actually will say like, how was your night before? And just everyone saying good is like not the right answer. Like we actually tell them what we made for dinner, or like a funny TV show we've been watching. And it's just way more engaging, and it doesn't take any more time than us awkwardly sitting around being like, yeah, it was fine. So just like sharing a little bit about your life and then slowly relating more to the person and being more vulnerable has helped a lot.
I agree with Meg. I think one of the things that we could try to do, or one of the things I tried to do, was to actually build a connection, like facilitate, like block off someone's calendar for 30 minutes and get to know someone. I started Salesforce during the quarantine, so I'm at a point where everyone's remote. It's hard to know anyone besides who you work with. So there's sometimes the best things, and I think the best things that have worked for me, for example, is scheduling these meetings and not talking about work, just getting to know them. You know, do they have kids? Like, what are their hobbies? And I think a lot of these things eventually lead to like the relationship, like they build relationships. I have people in the area who recommend restaurants randomly, and it's a nice icebreaker once in a while. There are people who, you know, we cook a lot, so we have like people who, you know, send me recipes if they think like, you know, something's a great vegetarian thing to try in the Instant Pot, for example. Or lastly, like, you know, we find people who play similar games, sports and games, like, you know, whether it's online chess or something. So I think that's one of the best things to understand, and sometimes even empathize with people, because people who have kids while working from home, I think I salute them for all that they do. It's really challenging, and it's really easy to think that sometimes, like, you know, they're not online all the time, or, you know, have a immediate response. Why aren't they responding quickly? But I think once you start noticing like what everyone's dealing with and what their hobbies are, you actually connect with them on a deeper level, and that helps you, you know, get more context. But even if you cannot do that, like sometimes it's not possible. I think the simplest thing is jump on the meeting 5 minutes before. It's just 5 minutes can help you, whoever's on it, you know, you just start talking to them and you get to know a lot more about them. So some simple things that work during quarantine can actually can build relationships. And I think those are the strongest roots if, you know, getting to know the person and working with them effectively.
I have nothing to add to that. That was outstanding. And because it boils down to, you just make an investment, and an investment takes time. Like how we build our portfolio, how we build our resume, how we build our financial wealth. It takes a long time, peeps. And that's what it is. It's an investment in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm so pleased with your wisdom that you've shared as a group of panelists. Thanks so much. And on behalf of all of the participants in this program, to Coach Cantelli, Dave, Meg, and Samir, thank you so much for joining us today. And you know, I think we could spend more time talking through these as a group, but unfortunately, we are running out of time tonight. But again, thank you so much. And if we could all use our emojis or give a wave, but say thank you to our panelists for sharing their wisdom. Wonderful. And I'll certainly, if it's okay with the panelists, can share at least your LinkedIn profile. So if the students did have questions, they could follow up with you afterwards. So we'll make sure to coordinate that somehow. But again, thank you. So I just want to wrap up our session with just some final reminders and reflections. And so Abby, if I could ask you to share the screen one more time for us. And as we think about our next session on Tuesday, which is where we're going to engage in the virtual simulation, we just wanted to collect some final information from you all. So actually by Monday, if you could have a representative from your team send to the GLC email address, which is glc@gettysburg.edu, your team name, your list of members, and each member's role, as well as the preferred communication method you're going to use during the simulation. And if you're unsure about what roles there are, if you want to go back to the session 1 slideshow in the Google Slides, there's a list of the roles there that you can reference. If you have more questions outside of this session, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to us as the facilitators. But that's the one thing we need you to do before our virtual simulation. But as we wrap up here tonight, I did want to do one final reflection. And so Abby, if you could go to the next slide here. Based on all that we've discussed tonight, we'd love to hear some key insights that you have taken away from this discussion about what it means to be effective team members. And so just take a few moments and think about what you've heard from the panelists, think about what you talked about in your teams, and just take a few moments and in the chat, just write a sentence or two about what is one insight you will take away from this discussion. Well, wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights in the chat there. That is great to see, and we'll make sure to save that so we can capture some of these key learnings from our conversation tonight. Thank you so much for your engagement. That concludes our session 2. The facilitators, we will hang out just for a few more moments on the call if you have any specific questions. But again, thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists, and we look forward to seeing you at 4 o'clock on Tuesday to begin our ascent to the peak of Mount Everest. Thank you so much.